This is a Scripps News Special Report.
Ultimately, we want to change society's view on abortion.
A year of change, rewriting abortion law.
They do not want their rights to be taken away.
1 year ago, the Supreme Court overturned what had been the law of the land. Roe v. Wade, no more.
Resistance always matters.
Now, what's changed, what's still ahead, and the impact on everyday life.
This is a Scripps News Special Report, Abortion in America. What's next? Reporting from Seattle, Maritza Giorgio.
The Supreme Court may have ruled, but the legal battles over abortion rights are far from over. Hello from Seattle. In a moment, I'll explain why we're here in Washington State instead of Washington, D.C. But first, the tumultuous past year. A year ago, by a 5-4 margin, the Supreme Court ruled abortion is not a constitutionally protected right, and immediately bans began to take effect. In Texas, for example, a trigger ban snapped into place, making nearly all abortions a felony. Over the past year, 14 states, including Texas, now have total abortion bans. Georgia has a 6-week ban. Florida, not shown here, may soon join Georgia, but legal challenges are pending there too.
These are children with detectable heartbeats, and I think to do that was very humane, and I think it was something that every pro-lifer appreciates that we were able to get that done.
Right now, about 2 in 5 women between the ages of 15 and 44 now live in states with more abortion restrictions than before. That's 25 million women. On tap for you, an important discussion about where we are as a country and where we are going. In a moment, national political correspondent Alex Miller joins me. She has been covering abortion since before the Supreme Court's decision, and 2 guests with differing viewpoints appeal directly to you at home. But first, we go to where this chapter in American history began. Jackson, Mississippi, the clinic at the center of the Supreme Court's decision. Our Tammy Estwick is there.
A year later, Scripps News sat down with Diane Durzis, that former clinic owner who was in the middle of it all. That Mississippi clinic, now closed, turned into a consignment shop.
How many people would say to me, "You're crazy. They're never going to make this illegal." But they did. They will.
When a conservative majority U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade a year ago, sending abortion legality decisions back to the states, some were shocked. But not Diane Durzis, the former owner of the Mississippi abortion clinic at the center of the case.
You know, those of us that have been providers have seen this coming.
In June 2022, this now unassuming white building in the middle of the artsy Fondren district of Jackson, Mississippi, was pink, iconic, and home to the state's only abortion clinic for almost 2 decades. Durzis ran the clinic even amid fierce opposition, protests, lawsuits, and sometimes violence on the steep street that led to the clinic entrance. Today, the Pink House staff have relocated to a place she calls Pink House West.
So they've just moved to New Mexico, where they've been warmly welcomed. It's amazing, a completely different environment from what they were accustomed to. But, you know, women can be seen there, unfortunately. That's not true in the state of Mississippi any longer.
Durzis has been fighting for abortion rights for decades. In the 1970s, after the Roe decision, Durzis worked as a counselor.
And when they opened the first clinic in Alabama, I just drove them crazy until they hired me.
A serial bomber struck that Alabama clinic in 1998.
He killed an officer who was working as a security guard, and he maimed one of the RNs who was there and who lives with us to this very day.
As years passed, Durzis watched the political tide turn. States like Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi began proposing bills chipping away at abortion rights. Eventually, Durzis moved to Jackson.
They got smarter as time went on. Then they began in the courtrooms, in your local races, and they built from there to be in a position which they're in now, and that's to completely take over a state.
I came to this capital in 1986.
On the other side, Terry Herring runs one of the biggest pro-life organizations in the Magnolia State, Choose Life Mississippi.
Over the last 35 years, we've passed many laws.
Among them, a trigger law, which immediately banned abortion in Mississippi when the Supreme Court issued its decision against Jackson Women's Health Organization. Many here now wondering what's next.
They're coming after your birth control next.
That is so far from where we want to go with our legislature and our push. To me, you turn it into that into a health question. Is it really healthy for women to be on hormones from the time they're 14, 15, 16? Hopefully not until they're 18, but is that a healthy thing for women?
This past March, facing Democratic criticism that he didn't care about life after birth, Republican Governor Tate Reeves expanded Medicaid for mothers. And to encourage adoption, lawmakers are pledging to reform foster care services in Mississippi, along with other ideas.
Those that have money will get. They've always gotten. You can catch a plane and be there in an hour. But those who don't have money, and from the states that we know all too well, they're the ones forced to have children.
Durzis hopes abortion clinics will be back in Mississippi sometime soon. But for now, she is focusing on her other clinics from Virginia to New Mexico. Tammy Eswick, Scripps News, Jackson, Mississippi.
From Mississippi, a state where abortion is banned, to back here in Washington state, where access to abortion has become more protected over the past year. In fact, for abortion rights supporters, the state has emerged as a beacon of hope. It's found success in new legal action, taking on everything from federal law to the FDA. At the center of it, Attorney General Bob Ferguson.
So we heard for many years, especially on the campaign trail, that Roe v. Wade was a law of the land. Yeah. Well, until it wasn't anymore. So what else is at stake here, and what precedent is set now for other controversial issues that have been considered law of the land?
Oh my gosh, well, if you look at Dobbs, even the decision itself, you've got justices who are essentially telegraphing that they would essentially welcome challenges to take on existing rights that we take for granted, right? How far does it go when it comes to use of contraception, for example, for same-sex couple, for same-sex rights? The list goes on. But if this Supreme Court is willing to issue such a radical decision, and that is what it is, it's a radical decision overturning a precedent that's been in place for decades without any new basis in law or fact, then yes, we have to be prepared for almost anything.
So what do you predict we'll see if we continue with that kind of patchwork system?
You're going to see a balkanization between the states. That's what the Supreme Court has put in place, where some states, like Washington, you have these rights that you've always enjoyed. In other states, like Idaho, our neighbor to the east, those rights have been taken away. And I do not see, just being candid, I don't see that changing anytime soon, and I worry that potentially it could get worse, as we've seen in legal challenges trying to take away those rights, even in Washington state, access to abortion medication, for example. So I worry that, I guess what I would say is, anti-abortion activists will not stop until they remove every last vestige of reproductive freedom for all Americans. They're not going to stop with Dobbs.
So this is just the next thing that they'll go after the next election.
Well, we saw
cycle.
that with the Mifepristone case in Texas. I mean, it's not just an idea I have. They went out and tried to do it, are trying to do it as we speak.
So you led the way on that lawsuit in Texas, the Mifepristone challenge. How do you see that playing out? I know it's still in limbo.
Yeah, so when that lawsuit was filed in Texas, seeking a national ban, by the way, on access to Mifepristone, most abortions are done by medication using Mifepristone. We did file our own legal action here in Washington state that was successful. And so what you have now are two cases with competing decisions, essentially, by federal judges, and those cases are working their way up.
But isn't the writing on the wall there?
I mean, perhaps. What I would say is, well, first, I'm a glass half full kind of guy in general. But I would say the legal challenge to Mifepristone is, it's out there from a legal standpoint. Mifepristone has been available to women in the United States for a couple decades. And so only now does this anti-abortion group come along and say, oh no, the FDA should never have approved Mifepristone. Well, that's a pretty steep hill to climb. It's been around for 20 years. It's safer than Viagra. Viagra is available without any restrictions at all, for example. So I feel that it's a pretty steep hill for them.
How long do you anticipate we're going to see all of this play out in the courts?
Oh, I mean, I can't put a time. There's no end to it. I mean, this is going to be a part of our lives as Americans for many, many, many years. Of that, I'm very, very confident. It's so polarized right now. States are balkanized. The Supreme Court isn't changing its makeup anytime soon. And so, no, you'll be seeing litigation around these core rights going on for many, many years.
People who take the anti-abortion stance say that this is just plain morally wrong. There's no wiggle room for some of them, not even in the case of incest or rape. Yeah. Do you think there's, I mean, you have people on both sides who are so staunch in their beliefs on this. Do you think there's any room for compromise?
Well, what I would say is that while folks have opposing views, the overwhelming majority of Americans want access to the full range of reproductive freedom. So while I get there's always a debate out there, but the Supreme Court upended the rights of women over many, many decades in a way that, I choose my words carefully, but it's radical. It's untethered from legal principles, it's untethered from legal case law, it's untethered from the view of American people or the facts. And that's what I find extremely troubling. That the only thing that changed, by the way, was one thing, the makeup of the U.S. Supreme Court. Nothing changed in the law, nothing changed in the factual backgrounds related to abortion. The only thing that changed was the makeup of the Supreme Court, and that politicization of the Supreme Court that takes away a right for the first time for the American people, that is deeply troubling.
A quick break, then I'm back with a panel of women on the front edge of this debate. For supporters of abortion rights, what is the best case scenario? Can abortion rights be restored? And for opponents, what's the end goal? Is it a federal abortion ban? This is a Scripps News Special Report. Abortion in America, what's next?
You're watching a Scripps News Special Report, Abortion in America, what's next?
Back now from Seattle, Washington, a state leading the fight for abortion rights. Before the break, I posed some questions. For supporters of abortion rights, what's their best case scenario? For opponents, are they satisfied with letting states decide, or is a national ban next? Let's find out. Joining me now are three women with unique insights. Alex Miller is with Scripps News. She's a national political correspondent who has reported on abortion since before the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Carol Tobias is a leading voice in the fight to ban abortion. She's president of the organization National Right to Life and the executive director of the Women's March, Rachel O'Leary Carmona. Welcome to you three women. Alex, I want to start with you. How would you characterize your reporting for the past year?
Well, it's been interesting to watch this unfold in real time. States where I reported pre-Dobbs, many of those clinics are now closed. I've traveled to roughly a dozen states since the Dobbs decision, and again, many of those are now closed. But what's been most fascinating to me, Maritza, is not just the laws that we've seen specifically surrounding abortion change, obviously changing the right to get one itself, but also the laws surrounding abortion, whether it's a state like Utah who has now said if you want to obtain an abortion and use a rape exception, you need to report that to law enforcement first. Or if it's Idaho, that has a new law dealing with moving across state lines. If you look at Florida, that is a state that used to have the most abortions nationally, and now they are facing down their own state Supreme Court case that could pretty much take away all of the abortions. There have been numerous states, more than just these three, obviously, that have made such changes, not only to the ability to get an abortion, but also everything around surrounding it.
Yeah, you've certainly been reporting on the front lines of history, Alex. Carol, I want to go to you because you've been fighting for the end of Roe v. Wade for decades. You've been affiliated with National Right to Life for more than 30 years. So what has the past year meant for you?
It has been an exciting year. After almost a 50-year battle to overturn Roe v. Wade, we were successful. So we realize we have a lot of fights still ahead of us, but we have an opportunity to protect more and more children, and that's what we've been working for.
Rachel, I was actually at the Supreme Court the night the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision overturning Roe was leaked. I saw both angry people, I saw elated people. So what are you feeling here right now as we talk?
I mean, I think that what has happened over the last year has been, no matter what your feelings are about abortion, I think mine are clear. I support reproductive freedom for women. And I think that no matter how you feel about abortion, what has happened post Dobbs decision has been a loss for our country in general. There has been an attack on democracy that has been waged on women's bodies, where we see in ballot initiatives and in proxy votes and elections that this is not the will of the American people. A supermajority of Americans across the aisle do not want this. And in fact, since the Dobbs decision, more people now support abortion rights and reproductive freedom than before. So I think this is just this place where we are out of step. We're out of step with the American people, and we're out of step with the global community who are making more and more permissive laws about abortion. And I think it's a correction that the American voters will make in the ballot box, like as we saw in 2022. And I think it's a shame for our country.
Carol, I want to show our viewers something that you tweeted. It says, quote, in every state, a woman whose life is endangered by pregnancy can get an abortion, ectopic pregnancies can be removed, and miscarriages can be treated. Anyone who says different is lying to you. But we're hearing countless stories of women who say that's just not true. Providers in Texas are threatened now with felonies. There are states simply that just don't have clinics anymore. I know in Idaho, a rural hospital stopped delivering all babies, partly because of newly enacted state laws that could subject doctors to prosecution. So why do you say these women are lying when medical professionals back them up?
Every state law allows abortion if the woman's life is in danger. If she has an ectopic pregnancy or if it is a miscarriage, that can be taken care of. That's why the doctors go to school, because they learn how to empty a pregnancy, whether it is birth or a complication earlier in the pregnancy. That is allowed in every state. And there may be cases where it's not being done, but a lot of that is going to be more of an insurance malpractice, whatever case. It's not because of the law. And I will say that there are some states that maybe some of it needs to be clarified for the doctors. But there is no state that is going to say if you have an ectopic pregnancy or if you are experiencing a miscarriage, you cannot be treated.
But do you think that it should be clarified if doctors are saying we're not going to do these procedures at all and possibly putting women's lives in danger?
Why wouldn't the doctors do it? I mean, we've got pro-life doctors. There are certainly pro-life hospitals, many in the Catholic healthcare system. They know how to handle problem pregnancies, and they do it every day.
Carol, 5 justices on the Supreme Court said they wanted to return this issue of abortion back to the states. So do you support that, or is a federal abortion ban your end goal?
Well, actually, the court said that they were returning the decision back to elected representatives. So that would be both state and federal. There is not going to be a national ban, as many people like to call it, a national law that would protect unborn children for the foreseeable future. What I think we can and should see are practical measures like no tax dollars being involved in paying for or promoting abortions, conscience protections for healthcare providers who don't want to be involved in taking the life of an innocent unborn child, making sure that women realize that there are resources available, whether it be the public or private sector.
Rachel, what do you see as your best case scenario right now? Can abortion rights be restored as a matter of federal law? I mean, do you see a path there?
There was legislation that was introduced by Representative Ayanna Pressley that would, it's called the Abortion Justice Act, that would return these rights to American women. And I think that it is federal legislation would be the protection that we're looking for. And if folks want to make the choice between themselves, their family, their doctor, their God, to carry a pregnancy to term or to terminate it for either medical reasons, health reasons, or other reasons, that should really be a private decision. And so we are fighting for that legislation that makes that so and removes barriers to access for poor women or for rural women that may have limited access to healthcare.
Alex, when the Supreme Court ruled, some states, like Texas, immediately banned almost all abortions. Other states implemented 15-week bans. Now they're moving to 6-week bans. So why is that 6-week mark significant?
Well, for the anti-abortion advocates, they believe this is around when you can hear a heartbeat. Now, it's not an actual heart, it's the blood vessels that will eventually form a heart. But for women who seek an abortion, this really narrows the window. Most women do not know that they are pregnant at 6 weeks. You know, it's basically like they are 2 weeks late on their period. And when I spent time in Shreveport, Louisiana at a clinic, one of the things that I was most fascinated by was the calls that they were taking. You know, a lot of the concern around here is what's called essentially timing out of the ability to get an abortion. So when you look at the numbers, the majority of abortions that are happening are not going to be allowed anymore if some of these 6-week bans continue to go into effect, simply because that's when the majority of women are getting abortions. And specifically for minors, you know, they don't know these laws sometimes. And so the concerns that they have, the fear of talking to a parent or guardian about this in these situations when there's a 6-week ban, every single day matters in the ability not only to go call a clinic, but also the ability to even just get an appointment.
Alex, Carol, Rachel, thank you so much. More to come here on this Scripps News Special Report, including a trend you may find surprising about teenagers and abortion. Back now with a trend you may find surprising about teenagers and abortion. This was the trend before the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. The number of teenagers obtaining an abortion had been dropping in every age group from a high in the 1980s. We have a lot more to get to this hour. We're about to take you inside a place called a crisis pregnancy center designed to steer women away from abortion. They're getting more funding than ever in places like Florida. But what's actually happening inside? That's next on this Scripps News Special Report.
This is a Scripps News Special Report, Abortion in America. What's next? Here again from Seattle, Maritza Giorgio.
Hello again from the Evergreen State. On the front lines of fighting to keep abortion ever legal, Washington is leading a group of 17 states plus the District of Columbia in a fight to preserve access to the abortion pill, Mifepristone. Here, there are no waiting periods for an abortion, which are legal up to the point of viability. That's around 24 to 28 weeks. On the flip side, states like Florida emerging as battlegrounds to impose new restrictions or bans on abortion. Florida is boosting funding for places called crisis pregnancy centers, designed as a resource to direct women away from abortion. But what are they like on the inside, and do they accomplish their goal? Alex Miller has more.
Abortion access in Florida may all but disappear.
So we're right back where we started.
The conservative-leaning state Supreme Court will make a decision on a challenge to a 15-week ban passed last year. If it's upheld, a 6-week ban on abortions will quickly take effect. It's already been signed by Governor Ron DeSantis. And the Republican-led legislature in Tallahassee is sending more money to dozens of crisis pregnancy centers nationwide. At least 14 other states provide similar funding.
Women aren't really going to have that choice to go have the abortion, so we need to let them know that we're here.
Angela Curatalo runs the Archdiocese of Miami Respect Life Ministry. She calls crisis pregnancy centers one of the best kept secrets. These centers are not medical facilities and offer limited services. Their mission is to steer pregnant women away from abortion.
That's your mission, is to change the minds of these women?
Absolutely, absolutely, but not coercively, just by giving them, if information is power, right?
They offer free pregnancy tests and an ultrasound. Women also have access to counseling, online parenting classes through toddler ages, as well as basic necessities babies will need.
They're instrumental.
Curatalo says most women walk in heavily considering abortion, and by the Catholic organization's own admission, leave feeling the same.
Last year, we had over 2,000 visits. Last fiscal year, we had 25 babies saved.
That's a success rate of 0.01%. But they believe, as do Republicans here in Florida, they're a critical part of the future. Their funding is set to increase threefold.
We were budgeted last fiscal year $140,000 to operate and maintain our programs within the ministry. And with the new law going into effect, we stand to receive $350,000 to help run our pregnancy help centers.
Statewide, crisis pregnancy centers will receive $25 million in taxpayer funds, up from $4.45 million in 2022. And oversight is limited. A Reveal News investigation found that Florida doesn't require pregnancy centers that provide medical services to be licensed or inspected. Correspondent says she needs more funding because she's expecting an influx of women if the new restrictions go into effect. Jerry Cohen has raised funds to support abortion rights for 35 years. The issue is personal for her. She remembers life before Roe v. Wade. She got pregnant in 1970, just before going off to college, and wanted an abortion.
It was very terrifying for all of us who got pregnant, and I didn't want to go to have a back alley abortion. I was scared.
Abortion was not legal in Florida, so she flew to New York to have the procedure. Now, generations later, she's sending women money to do the same. Her organization, Women's Emergency Network, has seen a sharp change in the last year.
15 to 20% of the monies that we've been giving individuals to get abortions have been for travel outside of Florida.
And she expects that trend to continue, especially if new restrictive laws go into effect here. As a former child abuse court judge, Cohen says she has interacted with some of the young people who, in her mind, will be harmed by Florida's new laws. She says crisis pregnancy centers won't help.
I did not find that decision was made casually, but I think that these are very well thought out decisions that individuals make because they have to make it for their own well-being.
Correspondent of the Crisis Pregnancy Center in Miami disagrees.
It's not always the right time for them, but look at Mary. Mary was very young when she had Jesus, right?
Or you're going to see a lot more teen deaths because they're going to seek to induce abortion, to do it in an unsafe manner.
And Maritza, we don't know when a decision in this 15-week ban will be made because the court has not even scheduled the arguments. They agreed to hear it back in January, but with this conservative-leaning court, we are expecting that they will support the 15-week ban and subsequently that 6-week ban, which would go into effect 30 days after the court makes its decision.
Alex Miller, you're staying with us for the discussion ahead, and also back with us, Carol Tobias, president of the organization National Right to Life, and Rachel O'Leary Carmona, executive director of the Women's March. Welcome back. Alex, let's start with you. In your story, Jerry Cohen talked about paying for pregnant women to travel out of state to obtain abortions, but she explained when it comes to minors, it's complicated.
Yeah, it's a real issue that she says they're wrestling with right now at the fund because she says it could become illegal. It could be illegal right now. They're really talking with their lawyers and figuring out this situation as it happens. But if they are not able to help minors get across state lines in order to obtain an abortion, their hands are pretty much tied, and the minors' hands are pretty much tied. Judge Cohen spent years signing these waivers in order for minors to obtain abortions without parental consent. But if it's just a 6-week ban, the window again for them to be able to get that waiver shrinks even more. So she said that for her fund, they're looking out for the minors in the coming months and years. She really sees this as the biggest issue for the state of Florida going forward.
Carol, as more states restrict or ban abortion, what more, in your mind, can they do to provide alternatives and support to pregnant women?
Well, I think the pregnancy centers around the country are doing fantastic work helping the women with a lot of different services, whether it's medical care, a place to stay, clothes for both, maternity clothes and baby clothes, and support. In some places, they're providing employment opportunities and training to help her either to be a good mother or to be a good employee. So they're doing some fantastic work. But I am excited that many states are coming forward with either new or expanded programs, whether it is a health program that a nurse could go into the home to do just basic general health and wellness checkups to make sure that mom and baby are both doing okay. Expanding the time of Medicaid coverage after the baby is born. A lot of, some of the states are doing like credits, tax credits for donations to the pregnancy centers, or allowing, once the pregnancy is confirmed, that child is a deduction, in the tax program. So I think there's a lot of different things that are coming forward to help women, and I'm very pleased with that, and I expect to see a lot more.
Carol, do you think that there should be more funding put in place to support women after their babies are born who are ill-equipped to take care of their baby or just don't have the financial support?
I think we are seeing some of that develop, mostly in the states that are protecting unborn children. They are finding ways to help women to take care of the child. And I would certainly never discount the adoption option. If a woman really doesn't want the child or doesn't think she can take care of the child, release the child so that another family can love and raise that baby. That is something that I don't think we talk about often enough.
Rachel, what's your response to that answer?
I think that the crisis pregnancy centers are a real disservice to women who are looking for support in a time that's very scary to be pregnant, particularly in states that are putting a lot of barriers between just solid information, medical choices, et cetera. I think that when we talk about even the word crisis, emergency pregnancy centers, crisis pregnancy centers, I think that it obfuscates what's actually happening, which is, the pressure to force a woman to carry a baby to term against her will. And we see that a lot with the anti-choice movement, where they'll use words like heartbeat bill that inaccurately describes the physiology of what's happening, talking about in very gruesome and very graphic terms, and things that are just actually not factually correct. So I think if we're talking about what is correct, we are saying that we are moving funding away from people being able to make choices, exercise bodily autonomy, and have reproductive freedom to decide just simply when and how to have a family, and instead moving it towards an agenda that, to be honest, can't win on its merits. It doesn't win at the ballot box, which is why it's been moving through a compromised judiciary. This is not the will of the people. A super majority of Americans on both sides of the aisle don't want this, and it's become more unpopular than ever since Dobbs. I think we wouldn't need bans if people were behind this, but in fact, we are banning critical life-saving medical services for people precisely because a small group of people who do not have the majority opinion in this country are forcing their ideology onto the rest of the American people.
All right, let's pause this conversation right here. In just a moment, we move this conversation to where the fight over abortion rights is headed from here, especially on the campaign trail, and how many states are now protecting abortion rights. That answer next.
The Dobbs decision was devastating, and Joe is doing everything he can do to fight back.
Ahead of last year's midterm elections, President Biden made a pledge. If Democrats kept control of Congress, he would push them to make federally protected abortion rights the law of the land. But Democrats lost the House. Half of states, 25, have kept abortion generally legal through at least 24 weeks of pregnancy. Alex Miller is Scripps News national political correspondent who covers abortion in America. Carol Tobias is president of the organization National Right to Life. And Rachel O'Leary Carmona is the executive director of the Women's March. Thanks for sticking with us, ladies. Alex, I want to ask you, where does abortion rank as an issue for voters you're talking to?
Well, it's really interesting because the reality is this is an important issue to voters, but it is not the issue. Gallup recently released a poll saying that more than a quarter of voters say that they would only vote for someone who shared their abortion opinion, but the majority of them do not see this as a single issue that they would make their decision on. And some advocates on both sides are looking at ballot initiatives as a way to get their point across. So we saw one in Kansas, we saw one in Michigan, and we're seeing one being proposed in Florida. There's a process process right now underway to get signatures to have abortion enshrined in the state constitution as a right. Judge Cohen is part of this effort to get this enshrined, because basically what she told me is that because the legislature in Florida has become so red that they don't believe that their rights will be protected in the long run, but they believe that the support for abortion, when you look at the data nationally and in Florida, shows that some level of abortion access is approved by the public. And so they think that the way to get the law to reflect their own beliefs is to have a ballot initiative.
Rachel, one thing Washington Attorney General Bob Ferguson and I discussed is the possibility of the Supreme Court reversing FDA approval of Mifepristone, the abortion medication. So if that happens, that would essentially be a federal ban on the way most abortions are performed. Is that the next big thing you're worried about? And do you think most people are aware of that possibility?
Well, we were very active in Amarillo in the Northern District of Texas when Matthew Kacsmaryk was making the initial decision, and of course went on to the Fifth Circuit. We are very concerned about this, in part because of the just wildly political language that has shown up in the decisions, and on the kind of factual and legal problems that plague the case, including issues around standing and precedent and just the science based on the case of harm. So yeah, it is something that we're concerned about because the facts of the case, or the data, or the science does not seem to be playing into the decisions that are coming out of, frankly, partisan, courts. And so I do think it's something that we need to be worried about, and I think that the American public is relatively aware. I think that the issue of abortion has animated American politics for 50 years. I think that's going to continue, and I think that we saw in 2022 Republicans backing away from some of their campaign promises. We saw language being removed from websites in advance of the election. I think Republicans know that this is not an electoral winner for them, and I think Democrats know the opposite. So I think that we will continue to see this issue play a large role in the months to come leading into the next election.
Carol, polls show that national public opinion is not in your favor. National polls show most Americans actually disagree with that Supreme Court decision on Dobbs, but you're finding success, especially at the state level. So how are you finding that success persuading Republican state houses and governors to back your cause?
I think the polling shows over a 40-year period that most Americans do not support most abortions. I think if you start drilling down into when abortion should be allowed, you would find that most of the Americans would support it in some circumstances, but certainly not the way it is being practiced. I think candidates are going to have to come out very forcefully, telling people what they believe. And protecting unborn children is, I truly believe, a winner for the candidates. And I think they can talk about things that most people are going to agree with them on. Tax funding, parents having the right to know if their minor daughter is pregnant and considering an abortion. Letting healthcare providers decide whether or not they want to, at least giving them the ability to not participate in an abortion. Making sure that women have the information before they make that life or death decision. Informed consent and right to know laws are very popular throughout the country, that women know the risks before they go through with the abortion. So I think there is a lot that candidates can talk about that speaks to the American public and where they are on this issue.
Alex, on the Republican presidential campaign trail, we are seeing some division. There's not a leading Republican who views abortion as a constitutionally protected right, but there are some divisions about issues like federal bans and exceptions for rape and incest.
Oh, there absolutely are. And the candidates themselves are all over the place on this issue. As you kind of mentioned, they're backing away a little bit from posting some of this information, talking about some of this information. The former president actually criticized Governor Ron DeSantis for signing that 6-week abortion bill, calling it harsh. Obviously, that was not something that you might have seen from the former president possibly a year ago. And that is because the polling does not support most of these bans that we are seeing. The majority of Americans, when you look at national polling, support abortion. And even in certain states, I've spent some time in some of these ruby red states. I mean, we saw Kansas keep the right to an abortion. I was in Salt Lake City recently, where they have been dealing with their own issues of abortion through the court system. And when you look at the polling in even these red states, Republicans favor some access to abortion. So it's been a really interesting thing to see these candidates try to dance around this as they try to court Republican voters for the primary, which obviously is so important for them to be able to become the nominee. But then in a general election, this is just not a popular issue for them. And one other thing is that the idea of this federal ban is the real question. A lot of Republicans have run on the issue of states' rights and that this was a states' rights decision. But when they get the question about a federal ban, that's really where the question lies. Obviously, there is the likelihood of having a federal ban. It's very unlikely. But someone like the governor of North Dakota, who is running and obviously not polling very high, he said he wouldn't sign a federal abortion ban, even though he supports the states having the ability to restrict abortion.
Carol, would you support a Republican presidential candidate who does not support a federal abortion ban?
I would want to know more about what the president is going to do in office. It may not be of national protection for unborn children, but there is certainly a lot that the president can do. And I think it's interesting that one of the bills that is often talked about is described as a 15-week bill, which would still allow 95% of all abortions to continue. And yet what we see in the media and from abortion proponents is that they still call it a national ban. Getting rid of 5% of abortions, to me, isn't a ban. So I think there's a lot of language that actually will need to be discussed and kind of fought over, because I'm going to support any Republican candidate who says they will overdo what Joe Biden has done in the last 3.5 years.
Rachel, final words from you here. In your mind, why is it important to protect the right to an abortion?
I think that bodily autonomy is at the heart of freedom. And I think that if we're true to the espoused values of our country, and and in this case, listening to the democratically expressed will of the people, I think that we have to restore abortion access. This is an attack on democracy. The people have spoken in elections and ballot initiatives over and over again. And what is clear is that the people do not support this. And we cannot allow corrupt courts to overrule the rule of the people. Like, it's just that simple. This is a question of democracy.
Rachel O'Leary Carmona, Carol Tobias, Alex Miller, thank you for the informed, respectful conversation this hour. And back here with some final thoughts in just a moment. This has been a tumultuous year for abortion in America since the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade, ruling that abortion is not a constitutional right. Since then, 14 states have banned most abortions. More have passed strict bans at 6 weeks. What happens next remains to be seen, but staying focused on the facts and listening to each other with respect will remain a pillar of what we do here. For now, I'm Maritza Giorgio reporting from Seattle. Thank you for watching.